started with some poetry today from this book, from the Limbs of My Poetry, and some of y'all have been checking it out online, and I really do appreciate that. And I kind of have Africa on my mind right now, and so that's what I want to share. That's what I want to talk about. And so this first poem that I want to break down is actually on my first CD as well, and it's entitled, Has Anyone Seen My Children? Has anyone seen my children? I had 6 beautiful children. They were 6 wonderful and beautiful children. They were full with life and vigor, not a care in the world. I was raising them to be free minds with free bodies. Nothing was to come between myself and my children, or so I thought. One dreadful day I came home, and on my front step my first child lay dead. With a gasp as loud as the thunder before the impending storm, I burst inside my home, frantically trying to find my other 5 children. I searched the bedroom, backyard, and kitchen, but every room was emptier than my now empty soul. I asked my neighbor, he knew nothing. I called my mother, she knew nothing. My cousin, nothing. Nobody knew anything. Has anyone seen my children? Oh God, has anyone seen my children? What has happened to my children? But then, as I bent down to weep and pray, I saw faint footsteps waiting to wither away in the coming storm. I followed these footsteps to the intersection where the waters kissed the land. Did my babies drown? I had taught them all how to swim, and I had not heard words of any tempestuous tidal waves that could have swept them away. But there they were, the footsteps of my 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th born. And all I was left with was a heart torn. 400 years later, 400 years later, I received word from a friend. My children are alive. My children are alive. Thank God my children are alive. I asked him what had happened. He had said that they had been kidnapped. Yes, kidnapped. He said that one lives in the minority among many who have ripped away his history. They have convinced him that he is no longer strong, and he is constantly reminded of his inferiority by police batons. His nickname is Nigga, but his first name is African American. My daughter remembers where she came from, but she is now ashamed of me. She now attempts to deny with all her might that her hips, hair, and culture derived from our once humble home. Her nickname is Morena, but her real name is South American. My other son is fighting hard to survive, but the government of his brother's country is legislatively stripping him of all means of self-sufficiency, so that rather than sell bananas and sugarcane to feed his family, he sells drugs that kill other families. His name is West Indian. My other son and daughter are lost somewhere in Asia and Europe. They are rarely heard from. Though I'm told that my daughter in Asia, she believes that she is the sole survivor of her siblings. My last son, who held on tightest to his roots, is almost near extinction. His name is the Australian Aborigine. My children were kidnapped and enslaved over 400 years ago, and I did not even know. That child that was killed, that was the mind of the African who was left behind. He became a pseudo-European in his own homeland. Yes, I am Mother Africa, and I am dying and alone. And it is my firm hope that one day my children will come home. Because you see, their continental houses are not homes. It is only my home where the heart is. Yes, it is also where the horror was, but it is also where the history is. And just as all of the governments of your countries have economically realized, my children, your home is where the future of the world is. I hear that my children have acquainted millions and trillions of dollars, but their dollars are primarily used to finance their own oppression. And I raised them to be free. So I now survive by whatever the leaders of my children's quote-unquote homelands decide, because my own children are not fighting to free me. What keeps me thriving is the hope that one day my children will come home, because reuniting at home is the only way they can ever be whole. My children, come home and liberate yourselves. My children, come home and liberate me. My children, come home and liberate we. Come home. Poem is entitled, Has Anyone Seen My Children? And I want to start to just break it down. And this is from my first CD from the Free Your African Mind, Love, Africa and Revolution, a Black Man's Anthem. My apologies. Free Your African Mind also appears on that CD, but it's called A Black Man's Anthem, Love, Africa and Revolution Revisited. And so let's break that poem down. I had 6 beautiful children. I'm speaking about the 7 continents, and as you have already seen from the poem, I'm speaking from the mindset of Africa. So I'm speaking about the other 6 continents. I had 6 wonderful children that I was raising to be free. But then I came home one day and they had been kidnapped. And I'm referring obviously to the slave trade. And there have been multiple slave trades that have taken place throughout the world, primarily the one that people talk about the most being the transatlantic slave trade. So I'm speaking to that as well. And so I'm skipping to the point where I say 400 years later, I received word from a friend. So my first child, I talk about him living in the minority amongst many people who have ripped away his history, and how he has been convinced that he's no longer strong and constantly reminded us of inferiority by police batons, and how his nickname is nigger, but his first name is African American. So this first call is speaking to African Americans across the country who don't realize their power, who don't realize their greatness, who don't realize that they came from a mighty people. And I'm speaking to that community as one of my children that have been ripped away. The next group that I'm speaking to, when I say that she knows where she came from, but she is now ashamed of me, and she attempts to deny with all of her that her hips, hair, and culture came from our once mighty home. Her nickname is Morena, obviously a term meaning black, but her name is South American. And that's a call to many people in the South American community who I feel actively work to deny their own history and to deny their own roots. The Gishwan, I see you joining. Egyptian Marine, I see you joining as well. Appreciate you all joining us on this Friday, and appreciate you all joining us on Facebook as well. And so I'm speaking to those in the South American community who have lost the knowledge of who they are, who have lost the knowledge of where they came from, and some actively deny their African roots. And I've been to places like Colombia, and I've run into many people who actively embrace their African roots. And so again, this is not speaking to every particular person from these various countries and continents, but we do know that across the world there are people of African descent who actively work to deny their culture on a regular basis, and this poem is speaking to them. My other son is fighting hard to survive, but the government of his brother's country is legislatively stripping him of all means of self-sufficiency, so that rather than sell bananas and sugarcane to feed his family, he sells drugs that kill other families, and his name is West Indian. And I'm speaking to the policies that have worked to destroy the West Indian communities on so many levels, from companies like Chiquita and the banana industries and different things that have crushed so many of our communities in these areas. I'm speaking to that community and how so many of people within our West Indian family have been beaten down and had their identity taken from them. My other son and daughter are lost somewhere in Asia and Europe. They're rarely heard from. Though I'm told my daughter in Asia, she believes she is a sole survivor of her siblings. I feel like there are many people of African descent within our Asian communities and within the European communities, and again, not generalizing all, but many who have forgotten that they're part of a diasporic movement. And I do believe that once we finally come together, that there's more power in coming together than staying in our separate communities. And I'm thinking even what's happening in places like China right now, where you have Africans who have been kicked out of their homes, and people, places like McDonald's saying that, we won't allow black people, and McDonald's had to apologize for that incident in China as well. But I'm like, we're part of a global community. Stop trying to depend on other people to recognize who you are. Get together on our own and make these things happen. That's what I'm talking about. My last son, who held on tightest to his roots, is almost near extinction. His name is the Australian Aborigine. I believe that Australian Aboriginal community is one of the communities across the globe of the diaspora that has held on tightest to their culture, but we see even they are being oppressed in ways that are working to destroy them as well. My children were kidnapped and enslaved 400 years ago, and I did not even know. That child that was killed, that was the mind of the African who was left behind. He became a pseudo-European in his own homeland. I once heard a scholar say that one of the challenges that many Africans had is that when they got their freedom from colonization, they didn't realize that they were no longer Africans. that they had become so European, so westernized, that so many forgot their culture, that they looked African, but the mindset was European. And we know that many Africans across the continent have fought hard to keep their culture and maintain it. But we also know that so many of us have become slaves to the Western model, that even after slavery ended and colonization ended, so many of us adapted onto that and manifest that in multiple ways today. And I'm speaking to that. So I say, yes, I am Mother Africa, and I am dying and alone. And it is my firm hope that one day my children will come home. Because you see, your continental houses, just to play on different types of homes, are not homes. It is my home where the heart is. Yes, it is also where the horror was, but it's also where the history is. I'm calling for all people throughout the African diaspora to embrace our history. You know, one of the reasons Malcolm X was slain was because he started to identify with the African continent and realize that there are many people on the continent who would identify with our struggle. And so one of the things he wanted to do was actually sue the United States before the United Nations, because he believed that there was solidarity there. I believe that we need to get into solidarity with our African brothers and sisters and come home, because there are so many opportunities on the continent. And while we're too busy disrespecting each other and not loving each other, other companies and corporations and groups of people are taking advantage of the continent in ways that we can't even imagine. Most notably represented right now by China, in terms of their influence on the continent and in other places like South America, like the West Indies and the like. I hear that my children have acquired trillions of dollars, but their dollars are primarily used to finance their own oppression. And I raised them to be free. What are we doing with our money across these different communities? What are we really doing to really build communities? We're spending so much money with people who hate us, who don't respect us, who don't respect our communities, who don't respect where we come from. And we're expecting these same people to love us and give us support. Look what's happening right now with the coronavirus right now, and how we're not getting resources directed to our own community. And we're expecting certain leaders to do things for us, but we have to do work for ourselves. And I applaud all of those doctors out there in our communities across the globe who have been actively saying, hey, we can't wait for these folks. We need to do these things on our own, and those things are actually happening. We need more of that. We need to multiply that by like 1,000, by 100,000, so we can really start to work on building our own community. I'm even thinking about people like Akon, who are building, his own Wakanda right now in different places. The dollars are there, but what are we doing with the dollars? What are we doing with the dollars is a big problem. So now I survive by whatever the leaders of my children's homelands decide, because my own children are not fighting to free me. I'm thinking about things like structural adjustment programs, development aid, and all of those different types of things that are working to destroy our homeland of the African continent, and how people aren't fighting to stop that. There should be complete debt relief. We should be fighting to make sure that our countries are not still on the continent, not still being held to these ridiculous standards, because it's extremely problematic. But we got to do that work. We got to fight. We got to put the pressure on our governors and our leaders and our presidents in the various countries that we are in. We have to do that. And so I say at the end, my children, come home and liberate yourselves. Come home and liberate me. My children, come home and liberate we. I believe that we all are in this together. We have to do this together. And I believe once Malcolm X said that, once people teach you that you've never done anything, you're going to believe that you can never do anything. And I believe that the true empowerment for people throughout the African diaspora is to come together. Deep Pain, I appreciate you joining. I see you. It's for us to come together, understand our history, understand our roots, understand our culture. And the one question I would ask for you all is that if you feel like your history is if your history is not important, why are school systems not teaching it? Why are people engaged in actively making sure that we don't see ourselves represented in the various books, on television, in different places? There's a reason for that. None of this stuff happens by accident. And so as I get prepared to do this next poem, again, that poem is called Has Anyone Seen My Children? from the Limbs of My Poetree, also on my first CD, which is on iTunes, A Young Black Man's Anthem, Love African Revolution Revisited. Of course, you can go and download that as well, and definitely check that out. And again, you could always hop in and hit me up with any questions or comments. I'm always interested in hearing what you have to say. That's why I'm doing this Deciphered. You know, I wrote the poems. I know what I wanted to say, but I needed to know what you all have to say, and I appreciate that as well. All right, so I'm going to go into this next poem. This next poem is called Privatizing Life. This next poem is entitled Privatizing Life. All right, and I was commissioned to write this poem for an organization which doesn't exist anymore called Trans-Africa. And I recorded it actually, and it actually aired on the radio, on a television, on a radio show this past week as well. And I just want you to hear where we're going with this. And again, you know, always want to get your thoughts and opinions on these things. It's called Privatizing Life. By the time you finish reading this, 17 children worldwide will have lost their lives, because 8 children die a minute in pursuit of potable water in order to survive. Partner that with the loss of husbands and wives, and you may end up cursing your eyes, because you know these preventable mortalities will rise, since water is now being privatized. Fed up with monopolies over diamonds, gold, coltan, and coal, man is now on a mission to monopolize Mother Nature's soul. No longer able to swim and drink from our world's deltas and tributaries, fees for life-giving water will have to be paid to evade the obituaries. Structural adjustment programs have become the equivalent of fasting. For our world's poorest governments must privatize water for loans everlasting. African growth and opportunity is being stunted by acts most tyrannic, while corporations scramble for water rights in a Berlin Conference-style panic. The rights of the human and earth are no longer relevant, because the right to profit now sets the precedent. Lower water standards and a depleted water supply are soon to follow, as Mother Earth becomes the liquid-deficient Mars of tomorrow. From blood diamonds to blood water, history is rearing its third eye, forewarning us of the coming strife, which we can no longer deny. Civil wars will be waged in the wanton pursuit of the world's water, recreating conflicts reminiscent of present-day patterns of slaughter. The developed world often acts in the most undeveloped methods by capitalizing on the lifeline of impoverished livelihoods. From protecting corporate interests to interring corpses, the IFIs have joined in the trademarking of our life-giving resources. But many of us will fight this battle, and that should now be apparent, for we won't allow the blue bloodline of Mother Earth to become a patent. As man's oil of the new millennium, the poorest of the poor dangle their lives before a prophet's pendulum. Remaining inactive is an act in pursuit of privatization and the death of man. So the blood of the 17 children that just died also lies on your hands. The poem is called Privatizing Life. Serena, I see you. Appreciate you joining me as well. And appreciate you all who are there on Facebook as well. Again, I wrote this poem called Privatizing Life for an organization called Trans-Africa. But this poem speaks to the challenges that we face as it relates to the depletion of resources across the world. So let me start to break this down. By the time you finish reading this, 17 children will have lost their lives because 8 children die a minute in pursuit of potable water in order to survive. That came from a study that I was reading. All of these poems that I read that have a development focus are really research-based because it comes out of my background in international development. And the study said that 8 children die a minute in pursuit of potable water in order to survive. And I wrote this before things like Flint and in other places. And, you know, being someone who's been in almost 30 countries, I've seen people have to walk miles upon miles upon miles to get water. You know, just the things that we take for granted. People are dying in pursuit of that. And I say partner that with the lives of husbands and wives, and you end up cursing your eyes because these preventable mortalities will rise since water is now being privatized. What we're seeing across the world is corporations taking advantage of of being able to provide clean water. You're seeing situations where people, things are happening with governments in terms of their water bills and things that are making it harder for people to get access to water. And if you think these things are happening in some foreign places, just keep seeing what's going on in this country, and you'll start to see that this stuff that's happening in different places is not so as far away as many of us want to make it seem. Fed up with monopolies over diamonds, gold, coltan, and coal. And I'm speaking about all of the industries, all of the natural resources that has been taken over by corporate interests, things that are just supposed to belong to the people, but are now being taken over by other sources. And now man is on a mission to monopolize Mother Nature's soul. No longer able to swim and drink from our world's deltas and tributaries. Fees for life-giving water will have to be paid to evade the obituaries. Hey, you want this clean water? Pay that fee. This is what I'm talking about. And this is actually happening right now across the world. Structural adjustment programs have become the equivalent of fasting. For our world's poorest, governments must privatize water for loans everlasting. I'm speaking about organizations. When I talk about IFIs later, international financial institutions, I'm speaking about organizations like the World Bank. I'm speaking about organizations like the International Monetary Funds and other organizations that have forced governments to have to do ridiculous things in order to pay back loans and get their debt reduced and different and some of the things that are happening with water are part of that problem. African growth and opportunity is being stunted by acts most tyrannic, while corporations scramble for water rights in a Berlin conference style panic. So I'm going back to the Berlin conference. Oh, I see. Once I was in the building, I appreciate you. Going back to the Berlin conference and how Africa was divided. I believe that there's a scramble going on right now for the resources, and water is part of that right now as well. And too many of us are dying because of that. The rights of the human and earth are no longer relevant, for the right to profit now sets the precedent. Lower water standards and a depleted water supply are soon to follow as Mother Earth becomes the liquid deficient Mars of tomorrow. Look what's happening right now in the United States. Hey, D-Hugs, I see you. Look what's happening right now in the United States as we speak. How many different environmental areas are having standards lowered? Look what's happening as it relates to emissions, as it relates to cars. Look what's happening as it relates to pollutants. Look what's happening as it relates to our rivers and streams and things. This is happening right now in real time. So when I say it's not too long before these things are coming here, it's already here. It is already here. From blood diamonds to blood water, history is rearing its third eye, forewarning of the coming strife, which we can no longer deny. Civil wars will be waged in the wanton pursuit. I do believe that we will be going, just like as we've gone to war over gold, just like we've gone to war over rice, we've gone to war over sugar, we will be going to war over water. And there are already places across the world where people are already fighting each other for access to good water. So it's only a matter before it escalates to a larger level. The developed world often acts in the most undeveloped methods by capitalizing on the lifeline of impoverished livelihoods, from protecting corporate interests to interring corpses. The IFIs have joined in the trademarking of our life-giving resources. I don't believe that these things should become a patent, and that's what I talk about in this next line. Many of us will fight this battle. That should now be apparent. We won't allow the blue bloodline of Mother Earth to become a patent. I feel like on many levels, everything's for sale. And it's people who can get access to it the fastest, who have the most money, the most influence, are the people who are going to be profiting from it the most. Just look what's happening now with this corona stimulus package. Who's getting the money first? The banks. And they're distributing it to the big corporate groups, the big restaurants, it's happening. It's happening right before your eyes. And I believe it was Jane Baldwin who said, you can't understand what's going on in front of you if you don't understand what's happening, what happened behind you. There's a historical pattern here that we're not paying attention to. But many of us will fight this battle because we ain't quitting. And that'll soon be apparent. For we will not allow the blue bloodline of Mother Earth to become a patent. As man's oil of the new millennium, the poorest of the world poor dangle their lives below profit's pendulum. Remaining inactive is an act in support of privatization and the death of man. So the blood of the 17 children that just died also lies on your hands. So this poem, by the time you read the entire poem, this is the same amount of time that it's taking 17 children to die. And that is our call to action. And I'm thinking about places like Standing Rock and what's happening in North Dakota, and how people are just fighting just for Mother Earth to survive, just for the planet to survive. And that is why I wrote this poem, because every time we go to that faucet or go to that refrigerator and drink that water, you should count your blessings. But then you should also count those blessings and say to yourself, how am I going to use those blessings to help other people get access to things like this? Because like I said, when you look at, and then you look at places like Flint and what's happening there, and Flint hasn't been the only case. There's so many things happening right here in our own backyard that we need to be active and take action on. So those are my 2 poems today. That's my breakdown of them. Signs of the Time, and how, and has anyone seen my children? I've shout out to Serena and my other American University family. Got shout out AU here with my little water sip. And let me know, do you have any questions or comments for me? I'm always open to hearing what you have to say, your pushback or feedback. That's always welcome here. Just want to say what's up to the folks who are out there and have taken the time to join. I really do appreciate that, for real. And so when we do this every week, like I said, Fridays, thank you, appreciate that. Fridays, we're here. We do this at 11. And, my hope is that the poems that you hear me recite are really a call to action for you and for your community. My philosophy is that everybody can do something if we all just believe that we have the opportunity to do so. If we all just believe that these things are available to us, that, being active, being an activist and not an act as if we're committed, just retweeting something, just clicking like on something, it's not enough. We need more. We need more hands on deck. We need more people get out there to do this work. And so between Has Anyone Seen My Children, Privatizing Life, these are all poems that you can access online. And if you don't have any questions and if you don't have any comments, my hope is that you would join me next Friday as we get into some more poetry, some more spoken word. My hope is that you will let people know that this is where we're at. I'm also going to start incorporating a little bit of hip hop in here as well. So, you could be ready for that as well. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Deciphered. Feel free to share these in your spaces once we log off. Take care and create a great, great day. Thank you, D Payne. Have a wonderful weekend. All of you stay safe. Seriously, stay safe. Peace.